you know, Rihanna's like a one-name person, like Beyonce or Cher, you know, just a one-name wonder. So thank you, Rihanna, so much. And thanks to everyone here at the Roosevelt Institute for hosting this critical conversation on building a green transition, a justice-centered vision for permitting reform, which doesn't sound that exciting. Okay. But when you burrow down into the real nitty-gritty of the Green New Deal, you got to come down here to this permitting issue. You have to talk about it in terms of, you know, how it's actually implemented. Now, it was just 4 years ago when Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and I had our press conference introducing the Green New Deal, and it was it was a gift to Fox News because they've criticized it for 4 consecutive years, every single night, as the destruction of our country's economy as we know it, as the unemployment rate has gone down to 3.6%. And as this incredible piece of legislation, which ultimately got passed, it's called the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act. But we all know that it's the single largest climate bill ever passed by any country in the history of the planet, $369 billion with justice at the heart of it, Justice 40 at the heart of it, environmental justice dealing with those communities that have historically been left behind at the heart of that bill. So that's what we're talking about here now. And many analysts now believe that it's not $369 billion, that it's more like $469 billion or $569 billion or $669 billion, because the appetite for wind and solar and battery storage technologies and all-electric vehicles, it's out of control out there in terms of all of the individuals and companies who are now moving in trying to take care of these uncapped tax breaks that are built into the largest climate bill of all time. Now, we can't say it's the Green New Deal, but at 600 or 700 or 800 billion, I'm going to tell you a little secret. Don't tell anybody. It is the Green New Deal at 800 billion. It's big, and it's, from our perspective, at the same time, just the first step. You know, Rihanna had a baby since we introduced it, and the IRA is our baby. You know, we were able to work hard in order to ensure that the political system would respond to all of the pressure that was created in order to achieve that great difference-making, history-making moment. And it couldn't have happened without all of you who are here today, and of course millions more, especially young people, across our country who played the big role in making sure that we had created a movement through the Green New Deal resolution, 14 pages, thank you, Rihanna, who built the momentum that brought us the moment when President Biden was signing that bill. And without the movement, there is no green transition to build with. But with that movement, we have so much now to build on together in order to accomplish these huge goals for our country. You cannot preach temperance from a bar stool. You can't tell the rest of the world that they should reduce their greenhouse gases if you're not doing it yourself. It's just hypocrisy on stilts, you know, still controlled by the oil, gas, coal, and other industries. So that's what changed. And now we have to make sure how we can build on that foundation so that we are able to have a stable, equitable future for everyone in our society, because it has to be a foundation of justice for everyone, Black, brown, indigenous, immigrant, poor communities all across the United States and ultimately all across the planet. So we got a lot done, and now it's important to get it right when we implement that bill so that we absolutely fulfill the promise of climate, racial, and economic justice. We know the bill is absolutely capable of unleashing a technological and economic revolution for climate justice, but it's not going to happen in a vacuum. Big oil's big money interests are going to try to hijack clean energy investments. There is a dark money pollution injecting itself into the political process, injecting itself into who sits on the Supreme Court and federal and state courts all across our country. It's dark money because it's oil, it's gas, it's coal. That's why it's dark. And they want to keep it hidden because they know the public reaction to that funding would be one of outrage. So this attempt at hijacking our clean energy investments is something that we are going to have to continue to fight. We're going to have to ensure that the forces that are fighting to maintain the electric grid stale status quo are going to lose, that we're not going to allow them to block distributed energy resources, transmission, and revolutionary clean energy storage projects. So we now move on to this new era where the battle has to be fought. And we know that history is always in danger of repeating itself. We know that those forces are out there, that they want to battle us as hard as they can. They're insistent, they're persistent, they're consistent. They're going to keep fighting, and we have a message for them. We're going to keep fighting too. We're not stopping. Our energy level is at historic highs as well. And we know that each and every community in America has a sacrifice zone, a sacrifice ward. I grew up in that ward in Malden, Massachusetts, Ward 2. My mother would say, Eddie, whatever you do, don't swim in the Malden River. We were 3 blocks from the Malden River in Ward 2, where all of the coal companies, all the chemical companies just used the Malden River as a dumping ground. And the reason she said, Eddie, don't swim in the Malden River, it's that it was black with a kind of pre-Jimi Hendrix purple haze that was over it, okay? So I was not Tom Sawyer on the Mississippi growing up, and I knew it. And that was the birth of an environmentalist. When you're 10 years old and you can't swim in your own river. And each city across the country has that ward, the sacrifice ward, right? And who lives there? Blue collar and poor people, almost invariably. It's never on the good side of town. It's always in the blue collar and poor wards. And the same thing, by the way, is true for countries around the world. Innocent countries, countries that haven't even industrialized, those are sacrifice zones as well, which are going to suffer the worst and first greatest harms of the climate crisis. So that's really where we are right now. As the great Dr. Beverly Wright, the founder of the Deep South Center for Environmental Justice, said recently, the implementation is the fight. So when it comes to implementing these historic green programs, I'm here to fight for building clean energy and building community engagement. We cannot stand by and allow Black, brown, and indigenous voices to be silenced. Those voices have been crystal clear, and so has the science. The UN report released yesterday was a clarion call. We're on thin ice as a planet. We need a global commitment to phase out fossil fuels right now. That's why I became the first American elected official to support the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty globally, so that we are part of a global coalition to reduce and ultimately eliminate fossil fuels from being used on this planet, because we cannot allow false and dangerous proposals like the House Republicans' bill H.R. 1 to be part of the discussion. Proposals like these would open the fossil fuel floodgates, bypass environmental protections, and prop up production of oil and gas on federal lands, all of which fuel the climate crisis and disregard frontline environmental justice communities altogether. We must band together in solidarity, ensuring that any proposed centers justice and does not perpetuate more harms to Black, Brown, Indigenous, and frontline communities who have suffered and sacrificed the most for generation after generation. So that's why today I am announcing my progressive plan for clean energy deployment and community involvement in that deployment. And it has 4 key steps. First, we need to pass historic levels for funding environmental justice and the National Environmental Policy Act, which would provide much needed investments in Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities and ensure more transparent, effective reviews of major federal projects. And guess what? Thanks to the hard work of so many people in this room today, step 1 is done. We got $750 million for more experts to be engaging with the community as these projects are being considered. Next up, we need to make new policy changes that will support transparent and efficient deployment of clean energy that brings frontline communities to the table earlier and includes them throughout the process. And that means getting the new project review funding out quickly, while also providing additional financial support to state and tribal permitting and historic preservation offices, which are under-resourced and overburdened by requests to review projects. We also need intervenor funding at agencies like the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, so that the Office of Public Participation can actually empower the public participation in a meaningful process. And we know that it's not just companies across the country that are pushing for projects, but communities across the country that want to get projects done. So my plan requires efforts to support programs like my LIFT Act, which would provide grants to communities that want to bring beneficial projects into their neighborhoods. This funding would help cover the costs of necessary studies and assessments in order to develop shovel-ready projects. Otherwise, we won't address the systemic inequalities that direct our federal riches to the richest companies while leaving resources out of the communities that need them the most. My plan requires efforts to make project timelines and approval processes public and easily accessible to anyone who wants to know. Information is power. No one should be left in the dark on any projects that might affect their home or their livelihood. Sunlight is not only one of our most powerful sources of renewable energy, it's also a great disinfectant to corruption, to compromise of the rights of every person, no matter how powerless they may seem inside of the American political system. Third, we need to fix broken interconnection, siting, and permitting processes for clean energy transmission and distributed energy resources. For the United States to run on solar and wind, we need first to build green infrastructure. And while there has been a rapid growth of renewable energy resources, there will be even more now that the Inflation Reduction Act passed, and there are nearly not enough power lines to bridge the gap between clean power centers, which might be out in the desert, might be out on the plains, might be out off the ocean. We need to ensure we connect those power-generating renewable centers to where electricity is being consumed. And my CHARGE Act would do that. We're talking a green transition at the Roosevelt Institute, but our electric grid is a 2-lane road that would be recognized by President Roosevelt. That's how little investment has been made in upgrading the electricity grid in our country. We already did that in the 1990s because Alexander Graham Bell would have recognized our phone system, but now you're all walking around with a device with the power of the computers on the Apollo mission in your pocket because we just broke down the barriers to entry of innovation. Well, the same thing is true in terms of Thomas Edison or or President Roosevelt, we can't have them recognizing our electric grid anymore. We have to move on so that wind and solar, renewable energy resources, battery storage technologies play their role in this revolution we need in order to reduce greenhouse gases, create millions of union jobs, and place ourselves finally not as the laggard but as the leader internationally. We need a renewable energy superhighway for the modern era, but building new lines and upgrading old ones takes time and it takes money. The CHARGE Act would make sure that companies that build these lines are using the latest science and technology, and that will help us avoid the mistakes of the past, making the lines more powerful and more resilient to the threats posed by climate change. The bill would also require that utilities publicly announce plans to meet clean energy goals and uphold their clean energy promises. And it would infuse clarity and equity into grid operating practices, which to date have been developed by grid operators behind closed doors in rooms often locked to outsiders, to the people, to environmentalists, to equity and environmental justice groups. My bill would establish a formal committee to ensure that these conversations are open, that they're transparent, that everyone has a seat at the table, and that we're able to move forward with every part of the community fully included. FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, is at the center of this, and it must do more to unleash transmission and unlock the interconnection queue. Utilities across the country must unlock the interconnection queue. Grid operators like ISO New England must unlock the interconnection queue. Right now, our clean energy future is waiting in line, waiting in the interconnection queue. In Massachusetts alone, there are almost, this is an unbelievable number, 19,000 megawatts of capacity, much of it solar capacity, stuck in the interconnection queue. We don't need new laws to get a lot of this done. We need to apply political pressure right now to get the system to respond to the opportunities that are already out there and are being incentivized by the Inflation Reduction Act. But of course, the status quo is going to fight as hard as it can. And this queue is keeping costs up, it's keeping emissions up, and that is out of line. So for example, at the FERC, the Biden administration, ISO New England, all the utilities across the country, all have opportunities to improve and unleash equitable clean energy and transmission development. At FERC alone, here's what FERC could do with no changes in law, just a FERC that acted right now with the powers which it has under existing statute. One, it can finalize transmission planning and cost allocation. No laws have to change for them to do that. Two, finalize a strong interconnection rule. No laws have to change. Three, establish minimum transfer of power between regions requirements to stabilize the entire system during disaster. They can do that right now. Promote the use of grid-enhancing technologies to make every megawatt go further, to work smarter and not harder in the use of these technologies. And my mother always said that was the most important thing that you had to learn, Eddie. When I was 10 years old, telling me not to swim in the Mulder River, she would also say, Eddie, my father was a milkman, Eddie, your father and I, we're going to donate your brain to Harvard Medical School as a completely unused human organ. You have to learn how to work smarter and not harder, and that's what this is all about. The FERC can do this. They can impose those regulations. And finally, prioritize and support public participation and equity. The FERC can do that now. In addition, regional ISOs and RTOs can do the same thing as full partners with the FERC if they have the courage, if they have the willingness to do it. And you know how we're going to give them the willingness? We're going to be putting our political foot in their back. We're going to be calling them out. We're going to be making it very clear that we're not going to tolerate this business as usual cozying up to the oil, gas, coal, and utility industries with a rear view mirror view of what our energy future is going to be. And we have to ensure that we put the pressure on utilities all across the country. They become captive of a backwards-looking agenda because they just get too close to the oil and gas and coal industry, and that's business as usual. And we just got to shake them at their roots and force the change there as well. And all of the Department of Public Utilities all across the country, they can change the rules with regard to intrastate, within a state. They don't need the FERC at all. They can just do it within the state to make sure that on the prairies, on the desert, off of the oceans, in their individual states, they bring in this renewable energy power. So all of that is our political agenda moving forward to build, once again, the movement that will create the momentum for the moment when all of that historic infrastructure collapses. And by infrastructure, I mean political infrastructure that's been bought and owned by these fossil fuel industries for generations. And fourth, we need to support projects that are of strategic and national importance and that are priorities for environmental justice communities. These are some of the steps lawmakers and utilities and the administration and grid operators need to take in order to power communities with clean energy while empowering them to be part of the planning at the same time. This plan, included in my white paper, which is on green paper, literally brings power to the people. This is how we finally break down those barriers. Now, Republicans in Congress aren't building the green transition, they're building boogeymen to scare us out of pursuing the real changes that we need. They're making environmental reviews the villain in this story. They're making community involvement the villain, but those aren't the villains. Those are families, small business owners, kids and seniors who just want healthy neighborhoods and a safe future. Let's not build boogeymen, let's build real solutions. Implementation is the fight. We can catalyze our clean energy revolution. We can prioritize equity and environmental justice in federal projects and investment. We can acknowledge the devastating harms that the fossil fuel industry has committed and how those atrocities have disproportionately affected communities of color and tribal communities. We can secure a livable future for everyone in our society. When we introduced the Green New Deal, Fox News, oil companies, they called it socialism. And what we said was, what do you call 100 years of tax breaks for the oil, gas, and coal industry? Give us some of that socialism for wind and solar and all-electric vehicles and battery storage technologies, and we'll bury the fossil fuel industry in one generation. So that's where we are. And now we have to make sure with those incentives in place that we don't allow them to use the old infrastructure to block the transmission of clean energy generated in our country to the homes, to the businesses who need them. So I look forward to hearing all of your proposals that you are developing here. I am so glad to be here with all of your great heroes that populate each table here and represent millions more all across the country on campuses, high schools. This is an incredible revolution, and we are going to win. They are fighting harder because they know how much this change is going to be a generational, political-driven effort. And in polling, good luck to Donald Trump trying to win any 18 to 34-year-old in 2024 on a rear-view mirror view of climate. And as he battles right now this indictment from Mar-a-Lago, he has to basically deal with the fact that it's going to become Mar-a-Lagoon within one generation, okay? Because climate change is just going to be coming right at his home. Thank you all so much for everything you do. Let me know how I can be your partner. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.